Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm a book loving, notebook hoarding literacy teacher educator on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. And this is the Get Literate podcast. On this podcast, we explore the power of leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing. We lean into our curiosity and creativity and embrace a spirit of lifelong learning to cultivate a life we love. Now, grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Get Literate podcast. I hope your Thanksgiving holiday last week was everything you wanted it to be, whether that is food, family, gathering together, gratitude, or a whole lot of football. I hope you got everything you needed to make the holiday wonderful. But now that Thanksgiving has passed, the holiday season is really kicking into full gear. We've already had Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and now it feels like the gifting countdown begins. My mother recently surprised me with a trip to my local bookstore to help get her holiday shopping underway. She was going to treat me to a couple of new books for Christmas, and I got to pick them out. So we headed to my local bookstore that I love, Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs. And not only did I get to pick out some new books, but I got to really enjoy the bookish ambiance in the bookstore, wander around with a good cup of coffee in my hands, and suggest a couple of books that I think I'll end up getting for my mom as well. But the question that was on my mind, that is likely on your mind from time to time, is this: which books should I buy? Which books should I get? There are so many books that are on my TBR stack and on my reading wish list. I could head online to Goodreads and go through my incredibly long hundreds of books listed on my want to read shelf. I could do the good girl thing and go through the upcoming episodes I have scheduled for the podcast and read the books that I know I should read. I also thought that I could go in for some really cozy winter reads because it's winter after all, and that sounded great, settling in by the fire with a cozy book. So what did I ultimately decide to do? None of those things. I decided not to decide. And I decided to let someone else do the decision making for me. How? I decided to crowdsource what I was going to buy at the bookstore. Now, crowdsourcing is exactly what it sounds like. It is going to a larger crowd with a question, asking for an opinion, and essentially going with what the majority of the group says. I talk about it in my own book, Leading Literate Lives, and I've always found that it helps me in a pinch when I can't decide what to read next. So that's what I did before my trip to the bookstore. I went online to Facebook. I went to one of my most favorite Facebook groups for all things books and reading, which is the Friends and Fiction Facebook group. Now, this is a pretty big group run by 4 best-selling authors. We've got Mary Kay Andrews, Patty Callahan Henry, Christy Woodson Harvey, and Kristen Harmel. This is a large group full of dedicated readers, about 98,000 of them. So I knew I'd be in good hands, and I was. So here's what I did. The morning before my bookstore trip, I put out a simple request to help me choose books to purchase on my coffee and bookstore date with my mom to grab my own books for Christmas. Now, this very simple post brought hundreds of comments and reactions in just a single day. And those comments and reactions are still coming in over a week later with more bookish suggestions. There were so many generous readers in the group that took the time to not just share their book recommendations, but their heartfelt sentiments about them too. Within that first day, I had over 20 something different book recommendations. And yes, that list has continued to grow since then. And this list was pretty varied and it was pretty spectacular, if I might say. Here are just a couple of them. The Nightingale, Sorrow and Bliss, Crossroads, The Great Alone, Remarkably Bright Creatures, The Maid, Westwood Giraffes, News of the Wild, Other Birds, Dinners with Ruth, The Personal Librarian, The Words I Never Wrote, One Italian Summer, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. The list goes on and on and on. But here's the best part. In this crowdsourcing, clear winners emerged. There were actually 4 books that seemed to rise very clearly to the top. And since I already read one of them, it gave me a really great top 3 to head to the bookstore with. That's what I want to share with you today. I want to share those top crowdsourced favorites from the Friends and Fiction group that I ended up purchasing on my bookstore date that maybe you can add to your holiday wish list too. So first up, the book I want to make sure I mention, although I'm not going to talk about it much because it wasn't one of the 3 that I purchased. That book is Lessons in Chemistry. Right? Lessons in Chemistry seems to be on everyone's most loved books. And it actually was Barnes and Noble's book of the year. Now, I already read that book, so I just immediately took that off my list. But if you haven't read Lessons in Chemistry, I highly recommend that you do. Talked about it before. I have blogged about it. It's one of my top books of 2022, and I definitely think you should take a look. If I didn't read that book already, Lessons in Chemistry would have been the very, very clear winner. But I want to talk to you about the 3 books that rose to the top that I hadn't read yet. And those are the books that I ultimately ended up purchasing. Now, I can't talk about them as someone who has read these books because, well, I haven't read them yet. I bought them with the intent to read them, but because it was my Christmas gift, my mother took them right out of my hands and brought them home to wrap. And yes, I have to wait for them for Christmas. So let's talk about the first book. I'm going to give you the title and author and read a little bit of what the publishing company has to say about the book. So after Lessons in Chemistry, the second place winner that was suggested again and again and again was A Wish for Winter by Viola Shipman. Here's what Goodreads has to say about this book. Despite losing her parents in a tragic accident just before her 14th Christmas, Susan Norcross has had it better than most, with loving grandparents to raise her and a gang of quirky, devoted friends to support her. Now a successful bookstore owner in a tight-knit Michigan lakeside community, Susan is facing down 40, the same age as her mother when she died. And she can't help but seeing everything she hasn't achieved, including finding a love match of her own. To add to the pressure, everyone in her small town believes it's Susan's destiny to meet and marry a man dressed as Santa, just like her mother and grandmother before her. So it seems cosmically unfair that the man she makes an instant connection with in an annual Santa run is lost in the crowd before she can get his name. What follows is Susan and her friends' hilarious and heartwarming search for the mystery Santa, covering 12 months of social media snafus, authors behaving badly, and dating fails, as well as a poignant look at family, friendship, and what defines a well-lived and well loved life. I am so glad that this book rose to the top, because what is not to love? It's got a good, cozy winter vibe. It has a Christmas theme, which I love. It reminds me of the Santa Suit, which was another book that I absolutely adored, as we look for a Santa Claus to kind of get involved with Susan. It just checks off all of the cozy vibes. And that's exactly what the readers and friends in fiction said. This is a book to enjoy. This is a book to get snuggly with in the winter, and it's perfect to read around the holiday season. So this is a book that I bought, and this one will definitely be number one on my reading list as soon as I get it back into my hands. So that's A Wish for Winter by Viola Shipman. Now, the second book takes a hard left turn. We are going from warm and cozy to serious, and I'm not sure what the word is, but very serious and very deep. This is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. After A Wish for Winter, this was the second most recommended book. I've got a tricky relationship with Barbara Kingsolver. I like lighter, cozier reads. I just enjoy the downtime, and I enjoy the feelings that brings, but I do read widely, and I read purposefully out of my comfort zone, whether that's in a genre or an author or a topic, so that I can learn and I can be better and I can grow. And Demon Copperhead is definitely going to be one of those books. Here's what they have to say. Set in the mountains of southern Appalachia, this is the story of a boy born to a teenaged single mother in a single-wide trailer, with no assets beyond his dead father's good looks and copper-colored hair, a caustic wit, and a fierce talent for survival. In a plot that never pauses for breath, relayed in his own unsparing voice, he braves the modern perils of foster care, child labor, derelict schools, athletic success, addiction, disastrous loves, and crushing losses. Through all of it, he reckons with his own invisibility in a popular culture where even the superheroes have abandoned rural people in favor of cities. Many generations ago, Charles Dickens wrote David Copperfield from his experience as a survivor of institutional poverty and its damages to children in his society. Those problems have yet to be solved in ours. Dickens is not a prerequisite for readers of this novel, but he provided its inspiration. In transposing a Victorian epic novel to the contemporary American South, Barbara Kingsolver enlists Dickens' anger and compassion, and above all, his faith in the transformative powers of a good story. Demon Copperhead speaks for a new generation of lost boys and all those born into beautiful, cursed places they can't imagine leaving behind. Whew. How is that for a book summary? As I stood in the bookstore with Demon Copperhead in my hands, reading the back, the bookseller actually came up to me and said, "You have to read that book." She didn't know me. She didn't know my reading taste, but she knew that this was a powerful book. It didn't matter what kind of reader I was. She wanted to put this into my hands. And since all of the readers and friends in fiction seemed to wanted to do the same thing, Demon Copperhead ended up in my bag and is book number 2 on my TBR list as soon as I unwrap on Christmas. So that's Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Okay, moving on to book 3. Take a second and think. What do you think it is? We've got one cozy read. We have one deep read. What do you think the next most recommended book is? It's Beartown by Frederick Bachman. So Beartown is actually a series of books, but since I have not read any of them, I went to the bookstore to get Beartown, which is Beartown number 1, into my shopping bag. I have not read this author before, although I heard many wonderful things about him from one of my favorite podcasts currently reading. And so I knew this would be a book that was going to be good for me. Here's what it says online. The #1 New York Times bestselling author of A Man Called Of returns with a dazzling, profound novel about a small town with a big dream and the price required to make it come true. People say Beartown is finished. A tiny community nestled deep in the forest, it is slowly losing ground to the ever-encroaching trees. But down by the lake stands an old ice rink, built generations ago by the working men who founded this town. And in that ice rink is the reason people in Beartown believe tomorrow will be better than today. Their junior ice hockey team is about to compete in the national semifinals, and they actually have a shot at winning. All the hopes and dreams of this place now rest on the shoulders of a handful of teenage boys. Being responsible for the hopes of an entire town is a heavy burden, and the semifinal match is a catalyst for a violent act that will leave a young girl traumatized and a town in turmoil. Accusations are made, and like ripples on a pond, they travel through all of Beartown, leaving no resident unaffected. Beartown explores the hopes that bring a small community together, the secrets that tear it apart, and the courage it takes for an individual to go against the grain. In this story of a small forest town, Frederick Bachman has found the entire world. So I will be honest with you, I have seen Beartown time and time again. I have heard people recommend Beartown to me more than once, and I still didn't put it on my TBR because this description is typically not a book that I lean into. Yes, I love to read books about tiny communities. Yes, I love to read about books that have some sort of rallying event that brings everyone together. But I don't gravitate towards books where that rallying event is a violent act or something that is going to cause me to really have to think. And I don't mean think in a good way. I mean wrestle with some of the events that are happening. But because this is an author I have heard such wonderful things about, and because these readers in the group were so adamant that this is a powerful book that they think others needed to read, I am trusting them, and I am going with Beartown by Frederick Bachman. Now, I love it because I just shared 3 books with you: A Wish for Winter, Demon Copperhead, and Beartown. One of those is in my book, Happy Place, A Wish for Winter. But Demon Copperhead and Beartown are going to push me a little bit out of my comfort zone and outside of my own happy reading ruts so that I can grow those reading boundaries and push myself to be a better reader and ultimately a better person. So the crowdsourcing has so much more appeal than just taking away your decision fatigue of what to read next, but it helps you to grow in your reading life. And we know that growing in our reading life helps us grow in our actual life. And so that is what I challenge you to do this week. When you are ready to choose your next book to read, I recommend that you crowdsource that decision. And you can decide how big that crowd is. Maybe you start by surveying 5 family members or 5 friends and seeing if any patterns emerge in those recommendations. Maybe you go to a Facebook group that you're part of, or better yet, you join Friends and Fiction and pose your request to the group there. You could always just go online and go to a blog or a website that you like and see what they recommend on some of their book lists. You could head to Goodreads and let those Goodread bots suggest a book for you based on your reading history. Or maybe you go to whatshouldireadnext.com and you pop in a book that you've just read, and they will give you a recommendation on what they think you should read next. There are so many different ways to crowdsource your next book, and I urge you to choose one that works for you to see how expanding your reading choices can actually help you expand how you bring what you learn to your actual life too. Not to mention, it's just plain old fun to do. So I would love to know what book you recommend for me as well. So find me on social media, or better yet, head to my Facebook group, Get Literate, and tell me there. We've got lots of fun planned there, from daily, what am I reading posts, writing ideas, and even a few bookish giveaways too. Which brings me to my giveaway for today. I've been asking you to rate and review the podcast in hopes of getting feedback and getting new listeners. And this week's winner has done just that. So Amy Warrants, congratulations. You have won one of the very first copies of my new book journal, which is designed to help you read books to literally change your life. And that'll come tucked into a very cute book sleeve with a little bit of bookish bling too. So if you want to be the next person to win a little book love, then head online, rate and review the podcast, and then let me know that you've done so. You can send me an email at stephanieaffinito@gmail.com. You can send me a direct message on any social media platform. And if you go to my website, alitlife.com, you can just pop a screenshot of that review into a Google form, and you will be all set to go for the next giveaway. So that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this crowdsourced episode, and you give crowdsourcing a try when it's time to choose your next book. Thanks for listening, and happy reading, everyone.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all of the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. You'll also find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life there, like book lists, notebooking ideas, personalized book recommendations, and an invitation to join my Get Literate Patreon community. Each month, we take a deep dive into one bookish theme and work to bring it to life in our own lives. You'll get bonus episodes, book calendars, live book club and notebooking sessions, special events, and much, much more. You can find more about the Get Literate Patreon community at getliterate.co. And one more thing, if you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or just take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and no bookish community too. Thanks for listening.